Welcome to episode 24 of our Thought Leader Conversations, where we have conversations with folks who have expertise and deep thought in topics that are relevant to, often adjacent to, the mentoring space, so that folks in the mentoring community can really benefit and elevate their presence and continue to practice mentoring excellence. I'm super excited to introduce Charlie. Charlie's somebody I actually know quite well because he is a trusted member of our extended team at Center for Mentoring Excellence and my own business coach, and who has made a huge difference in my work life as well. And for those of you who know me, if you make a difference in my work life, you make a difference in my life. So he's been a really trusted member of my team, and I'm excited to have him share some of his wisdom with all of us here today. He's advised hundreds of teams from Fortune 100 companies to tiny nonprofits through Productive Flourishing, which is the coaching and training company that he founded. He's the author of the critically acclaimed Start Finishing: How to Go From Idea to Done, and his current book, Team Habits: How Small Actions Lead to Extraordinary Results. He's a former Army logistics officer and a near PhD in philosophy. So he's got the best of both sides of the brain here. He lives in Portland, Oregon. And welcome, Charlie.
Lisa, thanks so much for having me, and I'm delighted to talk to you and everybody in this context as well.
Let's dive right in if we can. I want to talk about team habits, because in team habits, you describe how shared habits shape how teams function and grow. So let's just talk about what kinds of shared habits do you think help mentoring thrive within a team or an organization?
Alrighty, well, let's start by thinking about the concept of team habits, right? Because it is what it is, but yet I think we don't think about it nearly enough. So take everything you know about personal habits. Maybe you've read Atomic Habits or The Power of Habit or one of the many books about habits, which tend to be about individuals, like what you're going to do and how you create your own habits. But then extend it to a team. Because it turns out that just like you have your own, sometimes unconscious ways of doing things and being, teams have their own unconscious ways of doing things and being. And sometimes those team habits are really good and sometimes they're not, right? And, as I started writing this book, Lisa, actually well before I started writing, like when I write a book, I think in terms of paradoxes, because that's, you know me well enough. I'm like, why is it that these two things, which don't seem to go together, are creating a tension? And so, what I noticed, or at least observed, is that many of us actually dig, or at least don't hate our teammates. Like we like the people that we work with. Sometimes we have really deep relationships with them because we've been working with them for years. And so that's thing one. Thing two is we are evolutionary wired to work cooperatively. That's how we are the species on this planet that we are. So if you take those two things together, you would think teamwork would be easy. And yet it is not, right?
Mm.
So is really what makes teamwork hard. And part of it is these unconscious agreements that we have with each other. So whether that's the person on the team that can't thread and Slack or Teams to save their life and always fork the thread and you have multiple threads going on, or can't share a link, or that over talks in a meeting, or underschedules the amount of time for meetings. Like you can think of all those little things that we do. And the important thing that I want us to talk about when it comes to team habits, Lisa, is that we do these things to each other.
Mm.
Right? If Lisa, Michelle, and I have a team meeting and it sucks, we did that to each other, right? There's no external force out there in the world that's making it be that way, which means we have the agency and the power to change it so that it doesn't suck, right? If we're working in ways with each other and things that we're doing to each other, we have the agency and power with each other to change ththose relationships. Okay.
Mm.
So I think when it starts talking about how we make um, mentoring a team habit, we start thinking, okay, first, let's break down the hierarchical model of mentoring and like get rid of the notion that there are some people who are qualified to be mentors, and there are some people who are qualified or in the status of mentees, and start thinking in terms of what do I have that can help someone in their career or their job that I can share with someone else. It could be anything. It could be your massive skills at Excel. It could be whatever that is, and think laterally instead of like, I've been here 25 years. I've got the connections. I've got the expertise. I got that, and I'm qualified to be a mentor. And when we think in terms of what we can share with our team, and in this conversation, Lisa, I want to be somewhat specific. By team, I mean the 4 to 10 people that you work with 80% of your time.
Mm,
It doesn't have to be what's on the org chart, right? Because org charts often don't show reality, but like these people that you spend a lot of time working with each other, that you do have some degree of rapport, relationship, and cooperative power with.
mm,
So if you think of those people, every single one of those people have unique talents, skills, perspectives that they could share with every other member, just like you as part of that team had that as well. And so the bridge here is to break the hierarchical model and to think, as a team, what are we setting up as a conscious agreement that we are open to both being mentored by teammates and mentoring teammates, and what does that look like? So that would be my first place to start, Lisa.
yeah, I love that. The thing we always say is that learning is the purpose, the process, and the product of mentoring,
Mhm.
right? And if you think about, team habits as how are we going to continue to learn and to encourage learning, and something I know you talk about a lot, which is learning from, the lowercase f failure, right? As well, having this environment where you are constantly learning from one another and creating that. Those mentoring moments in a way that maybe it's not a capital M long-term mentoring relationship, but it's each becoming the learner and each becoming the teacher in that as well. So that's a great point. Um, so what led you to focus on team level habits, and how does that change the way we think about development and collaboration?
So when I was speaking for Start Finishing, Start Finishing is really how does an individual do their own best work, right? So it's really individual focused. And I was speaking in organizations, and inevitably there would be some manager, some brave manager that would raise usually his hand and say, "Hey, Charlie, these ideas are great. Can you like talk to senior management to like approve that we can do these things, like that we can have time where we are not available for meetings, like some of the basic productivity stuff that I teach. So can you get uppers to agree with this?" And I found that to be a very interesting question. So the more I got that question, um, mm, the more pushback I started to give to it. So typically, Lisa, it would be like, so you mean you need a senior executive to authorize at your team level how you manage your time throughout the week and how you manage with each other, how you get your work done. You really need a senior executive to make that decision for you. And they were like, well, no, not really. Like, we can do this. And so it really started from that, saying, like, hey, we have this incredible amount of agency and power that happens at the team level. We have team habits that we can all impact and change, and we don't need senior management to do it. And in fact, we don't need to be a manager to do it. And so I focused on team habits because it is one, a truth that we're all working in a team, right? If you work in unless you're truly solo, you work in a team. Two, you can change your team. And three, you're already working with your team. The question is, are you working well or not? And so it gives us this locus of change. And the last thing that I focused on team is because teams are really the atomic unit of value in an organization, which many people think it's the individual. But think about how hard it is for any individual to actually create value in the way that we're talking about. That happens at the team level, actually. It's the interrelationships between different teammates that creates significant results or measure or key metrics or whatever you're talking about. So I'll focus there, and I also have to look at the timestamp of this. I wrote this during the early stage of the pandemic as well, Lisa. So at that point in time, the pandemic gave us a lot of pain, but it gave us some huge gifts because there were many teams that actually did not know how to meet when the lockdowns happened because they had been co-located for so long. They're like, do we use Zoom? Do we do phone calls? Like, what? How do we actually get together? And so it's a great time as teammates, as teams were figuring out to talk about these things and make, um, Lisa, you've heard me say this a lot, make the obvious explicit, right?
Mm, yeah.
But also make the absurd visible because there's a lot of absurdity that happens in a day-to-day work that we just don't talk about. We just let it be. And since we were going through this period to where so many things were visible and we had to figure it out, I was like, let's take this moment to make the absurd visible. So maybe if we're going to have to make work, like we're going to have to figure out how to work together again, maybe we can do that better. Like, let's not build together something that's busted and take the old way that didn't work and just find a virtual way to do the thing that didn't work. How about we take this moment that's rare in a lifetime to say, hey, what would actually make sense for us to build together as a way of working that's resilient enough that with the changes that are going to come back once we're out of lockdown can still endure with modification as opposed to just thinking what's just the lockdown procedures here. So it's just this point in time where like teams have always been the atomic unit of value for an organization, but we're going through so much disruption that it just made sense to start there and not leave it to senior executives to redesign work because that tends not to work out very well.
Yeah. It seems to me, what's really becoming obvious to me as you're talking is the parallel with mentoring in terms of intentionality of contracting, right? And agency and ownership of each member of the team in terms of how they're interacting with one another.
Yeah. Yeah. That's if there's one thing I want people to take away from team habits. Yes, there are a lot of habits, and we talk about the categories of team habits, whether it's decision making, whether it's prioritization and goal setting, whether it's collaboration, meetings, so on and so forth. And we might get into those. But fundamentally, what I want people to do is own the relationship that they have with their teammates and be the teammate that they want their teammates to be. Right. And like, we don't like it when organizations treat us like cogs in the machine. And yet, sometimes we can treat our teammates like cogs. And instead of these treasured people doing their great work, doing the best that they can, trying to help us and trying to, trying to get through the day and make it better.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. So where do you start? If you're a team, if you are a member of a team or a leader of a team, where do you start in that process of intentionality?
Um, so you start with your broken printers. And I use this as a metaphor. Every organization that I've ever worked at or consulted with has at least one broken printer that everybody knows about, one physical broken printer that just it doesn't act right for whatever reason, and we all know it. It like has that stupid string down the line, or it's got some code in it, or it's always out of paper, or it's locked in the office manager's office. There's something messed up about this printer, and it usually is not a problem until it's a problem, and then it creates all sorts of downstream effects, right? And so um, I use that as an analogy because it can be that very literal broken printer, which I know some people on the meeting today are thinking about that printer and like, yeah, it's there. Or it can be the small things that we do to each other that we know don't work, but we just accept. For instance, we chronically underschedule the amount of time we need for a meeting. So we get through 2 of the 7 agenda items and continually punt them and don't do that. Or we have a meeting and we don't catch our action items at the end. So we're all sort of left wondering, like, what do we do? Where are we going with that? Right.
Mhm.
And I pick on meetings because meetings are the category of team habits where all the other team habits happen in rapid succession, which is why we talk so much about meetings. So if you have poor belonging, which is a category of team habits, it's going to show up at a meeting. If you have poor goal setting and prioritization, it's going to show up in a meeting. If you got poor communication, it's going to show up in a meeting. And so in the work that I do, Lisa, what I've recognized is like you don't necessarily need Charlie to come in and diagnose what's wrong and what's not working. Like you already know. You already know what's not working in your team. What you might not know as how you can fix it and where to start. Right. And the reason I say with the broken printer is because it turns out it's easier from a change management perspective to start with something that people on your team are already frustrated with, or it's already causing them pain.
Mm,
Like if it's already creating a headache, you don't have to convince people to like change that. Like finally, we're talking about the thing. It's usually where we start with some sort of oblique thing that people aren't thinking about, and we want to change that thing as opposed to starting at the thing that's already painful for people. And what that does is it creates a recognition at the team level that you can change, but it also starts to give you the process for changing habits. So it creates this meta habit of changing habits. It's important. So if you can fix the painful thing,
mm.
then you learn how to fix the next painful thing. And then you learn how to fix the next painful thing. And then you might finally get to those like opportunities that are not painful, but you've been meaning to get to for a while because you have developed this muscle with each other that we can solve hard problems together. And we know how to do that. But we started again with the thing that was pissing us off multiple times a week, as opposed to the thing that's like, it would be good if we fixed it, but it's not really a problem.
Yeah. So here's a question for you is, when we think about it in the mentoring context, which is often, probably most often, a one-on-one relationship, it feels in some ways a little less safe than it does in the team context to raise that thing, right? I mean, to me, there's a little bit more of a safety in saying there's something that's broken in the way we all interact with one another, and there's no one finger that's assumedly pointed at somebody. But when
Correct.
it's a one-on-one relationship, if you're raising something that doesn't work, it can feel more blaming.
Hmm.
So how would you raise that? Let's assume a mentoring pair didn't start as I had advised them with a contracting conversation, but they're coming kind of back to that. So how do you begin that?
Yeah, and thanks for adding that point. The other reason I focus on team habits is because it's not focusing on what one individual may be doing. It's just
Mhm.
the ways we're
Yeah.
working with. And so like very few people want to be a part of someone else's change agenda.
Mhm.
Like Lisa doesn't want Charlie to change her, and Charlie doesn't want Lisa to change him. Right. But we might be open to the way that we work with each other. Like we can change in that space. So it's helpful there. So I'd say in the context that you're talking about, instead of making it around like, hey, like assuming I'm the mentee and Lisa is the mentor, right? I wouldn't approach it being like, Lisa, this thing that you're doing isn't working for me. Or here's, I would instead say, hey, in the point that you're talking about setting up the expectations or a charter, I would say, hey, I've been over the last few months really unclear about what our shared expectations are here. And how we might come together and actually articulate what those are so we're on the same sheet of music. And it's because I've just sent some discomfort because I don't know what to bring you. I don't know what's fair. I don't know what to expect from you. And it's actually getting in the way of what I believe could be a great relationship and what I think is a great relationship. So it's not about you. It's just about this lack of clarity about what's going on here. And is that something you'd be open to talk about? And again, I think phrased that way, it depersonalized it. It doesn't, I hope if Lisa were the mentor, she wouldn't be like, oh, you're coming at me about something. It'd be like, oh, we just forgot a step, right? Or, oh, things have changed for me. Or, oh, like when I started this, I had one position, but then since then I've had another sort of fractional position thrown on me and I don't have the capacity that I used to. And it just opens up that space. And so one of the key things about the approach to team habits or really any change management thing is or system or method is we start by aligning on the problems before we start getting into solutions. And this is an important point because whenever we think something's wrong, we assume that other people think something's wrong too, or other people think that there's a problem. And we immediately start going to throwing out solutions to solve a thing. But it might be that someone never saw it as a problem or that they see the problem differently. And if they don't see it as a problem or they see the problem differently, you're not going to be able to come up with a solution that works. Right. And so, in the example that I just gave with Lisa being the mentor, the problem that I'm articulating is that there's a lack of shared expectations, and
Mm,
I'm having an issue with it. And inviting Lisa to sort of be like, oh, yeah, that's been a thing for me too. Like, I haven't been clear about what's going on. And now we actually have a shared problem that we can solve together as opposed to just random solutions that we might put down on the table.
Yeah. I'm wondering how in the agreement phase can you set the stage for the conversation when it's necessary later on? Like, you know, is it, I often suggest to people that they say, feedback's really important. Let's have an ongoing conversation about feedback. But it seems to me that maybe something more specific might be in order.
Yeah, what I would suggest is actually the question being something along the line of how would you prefer that we resolve tension and conflict with each other?
Mm,
And I want to say that, and I have to tell all of my clients this, right? Lisa, I don't think we've had this conversation, but tension is not necessarily conflict. And what happens in a team setting is because we sort of fuse tension and conflict to be the same thing. When something gets tense, we lock up and we run from it and so on and so forth. And sometimes we're just tense because it's ambiguous and we don't know what to do, but it's not conflict, right? And so I would put in the agreement, how do we want to handle tension and conflict should it arise between us? Because it's natural.
mhm,
Tension is natural in human relationships, right? Conflict doesn't have to be in there, but tension is just a part of it, right?
mhm.
So that tension could be, I've got some hard feedback to give you, and I'm not sure how to give it to you, but I know that withholding it is also not helping you either, right? That creates tension, and we want to talk about how that unfolds. And so I know it's opinionated in this sense, but it's also I think like I want to put the hard stuff up front in agreements because once you're in a relationship, it's hard to change dynamics once you're in the flow. It's easier to talk about it at the beginning, right?
Mhm.
And so, for instance, in the case where your mentor is your supervisor, as you know, Lisa, that creates some tensions,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Because when is this person your boss and when is this person your mentor? I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying you have to be conscious about that relationship and talk about that tension so that the mentee can maybe say, hey, Lisa, in this moment, it sounds like you're being more of my supervisor and boss, right? When really what I was looking for was more of a mentorship approach on this one, right? That's hard to do with your boss, but if you set it up at the beginning and you talk about conscious ways, again, a little mini team habit between you and your mentor, you can actually resolve that a lot clearer because you have an agreement that should that thing happen, here's how it's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm laughing because this is something my 22-year-old daughter knows instinctively. She called the other day for some guidance, and I put my mom hat on, right? And she said, "You're talking like you're my mom. What I really need from you right now is advisor stuff." Oh,
Yeah.
I think it's helpful, right? I mean, I think we're so unfortunately where so many people go first is like the apologies for it, or the shame, or the guilt, or the avoidance, or what have you, when actually just calling out the role and the need is super helpful.
Yeah, calling out the role and the need, especially when you're in multidimensional relationships, right? And this is important when you're in a mentoring relationship, but that relationship may be a collaborative relationship or it may be a hierarchical relationship, or you might be put on a project with your mentor.
Yeah.
Right, and it's like, hey, in this moment I'm talking to you in the context of being a collaborative for this project, right? I'm asking for your ideas about how we might go forward with this project, which is different than, hey, I'm asking you as a mentor to help me come up with ideas for how we might go forward. That's
Yeah.
it's nuanced, but it's an incredibly different relationship.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Well, while we're talking about the subject of intentionality, I'd love to just see your thoughts on how leaders can intentionally design team rhythms, the meetings, reflections, rituals that support mentoring and connection so that they can have space for this kind of conversation going forward.
Yeah, I love that. So one thing, I mentioned this in team habits, but it's also in your work as well, is understanding that like mentoring and creating belonging habits and things like that are not a distraction to the work. They're not a sort of side bonus thing that you might get to, but they're actually core to the work itself and they
Mhm.
have value alongside getting stuff done. And I say that because many leaders, and I understand why, I really do, are so focused on hitting the metrics, getting stuff done. Like, let's cut out the chit chat and sort of random stuff and like, let's focus without understanding that it's actually the mentoring, the belonging, the relationship building that actually makes the work work. Right. And if you don't have those things, teams will struggle at doing hard things together. Right. So, first is a mindset piece. I've just understanding that this is probably some of the most valuable work your team will do. Therefore, it's worth time to schedule the space for it. Usually, what I would say is um, talk to your team about it because your team is smarter than I am. They tend to know what they need better than I do in that
Mhm.
sense. But when you do set up these conversations, divorce them or distance them from the tactical getting things done, planning, strategizing sort of side of things, because teams will already have a bias and a sort of feeling that they should be doing that together,
Yeah.
as opposed to being like, oh, we have an hour a month where we have co-mentoring pods to where we will just ask each other like in small little pods together that is facilitated by either a teammate or the manager, where we just get to bring an issue and ask each other how they might go about it or ask mentoring questions, right? So go to the Center for Mentoring Excellence.com to get more ideas about mentoring questions and tips. But for me, I would just say on that side, um, managers, leaders, prioritize, like, what would you do if this were the most important thing that your team could do to support each other? Treat it like that. Figure out a cadence that works for them. And there's no one right cadence for every team. Sometimes it's twice a quarter, sometimes it's once a quarter, sometimes it's once a month. Like, think about that. But I think so prioritize it. Um, find the Goldilocks cadence that works for your team, like actually talk to them.
Yeah.
3, divorce it from other work that's going to be pressing, because otherwise that's what's going to get their attention. And then 4, designate someone, it might be yourself, but it doesn't have to be yourself, as the team champion for this, whose job it is to keep it going and keep it organized, so on and so forth. I think it's personally better if it's not the manager. Um, and you can get that buy-in, but if not, right, make sure that there's, for lack of better words, a project manager to keep this going. Otherwise, I've seen it happen too much. It just dies to the urgent. And then it's like that thing you've been meaning to do for the last 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, the ripple effects of that are so huge too, right? If you're equipping people to do that in smaller pods, then the skill becomes the skill of inquiry and helping, agency for problem solving and all of those things.
Yeah.
So
And it's
it's
building, I mean, it's important to do on its own, but it's also building leadership bench strength, because you're teaching skills that you would want your future leaders to know how to do. You're teaching processes that you want them to be aware of. You're teaching those spites. So by actually distributing it, you're actually improving the total readiness and potential of your team, as opposed to holding it and being the manager yourself.
yeah. I think I'd add just kind of the two other best practices that I've seen are leaders sharing their own learning journeys, right? So
Mhm.
whether it's mentoring stories or something that they're learning or something that they're working on, it's the phenomenon that I think I've mentioned to you of the Pacific Northwest stop sign, right? So have we talked about
You
that?
haven't talked about this, no. So
Okay,
new
so
story.
yeah, new story. So what happens at a Pacific Northwest stop sign, Charlie?
Um, Seattle or Oregon?
I didn't know there was a difference.
There is a difference.
Is there a difference? Okay,
There
what
is.
happens in Oregon at a stop sign?
Um, Everybody stops and waits for everybody else to see what they're going to do before they go through.
Yeah, so something very similar in Seattle. You go, no, you go, no, you go, no, you go. And then somebody finally steps on the gas and everybody else gets irritated, flips them off or shows another sign, other signs of aggression,
Mhm.
right? And it's sort of the opposite of that. It's like what should happen in teams is everybody wants to put their foot on the gas, right? Make it a New York stop sign, but everybody goes because that, and then you reward the going instead of rewarding the stopping.
Yep.
Um, And so so the idea of kind of like sharing what it is you're learning and sharing what the strategies are. And then the other kind of best practice that I might add that I've seen in organizations is rewarding the participation in either those co-mentoring circles or, my favorite is a leader who required everybody on his team to demonstrate in their performance cycle that they've invested in their own learning and in somebody else's learning. They didn't say through mentoring, they just said somehow. And then you've got the intentionality, you've got the incentive, and then you've got the celebration at the
Absolutely.
time.
Absolutely. And while we're talking about this, the reason I focus so much on habits as a mindset is because there's this way in which we get consistent with something and we do it continually that it becomes a lot easier to do and a lot easier to sort of share with other people, share processes, share habits. That's actually one of the reasons why we are the apex species on the planet is not that we are individually smart, is that we've learned how to learn from each other.
Yeah.
Right. And so the more that I want what I would want people listening to today's conversation to think about is like, how do I make this consistent and repetitive enough that it doesn't feel like a huge lift to do every time, whether that's, making yourself a mentoring checklist or just questions you might ask, or just, whatever it takes for you in your own brain, because we're all, neuro different in different ways, but like treat it as if it were like getting coffee at work, right?
Mm,
You probably have figured out how you're going to do that because you don't want to make that decision every day, right? How could mentoring be closer to that type of habit than this sort of extra thing that is hard and you've been meaning to get to and like it's, difficult, so on and so forth.
yeah. The beautiful thing about it is it can happen consecutively, right? And integrated with the things you're already doing. All right. So as we're recording this conversation, it's November 4th. Yikes. And some might say there's 8 weeks left in the year. What you would say is there's 6 weeks left in the year because nothing gets done the last 2 weeks, right? I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but
I would
I,
say there's 5 because
there's
Thanksgiving is the same.
okay. So there's 5 weeks in the. This is why we ask for confirmation before we make assumptions. There's
Yeah.
5 weeks left in the year. So as we think about sort of long-term planning and looking forward to 2026, what should we be thinking about doing for the rest of the year to set ourselves up for success?
Um, that's a great frame, and I'm going to start it from an unusual space. You know this, Lisa, because so many people come to me and they're like, "What are all the things we should add to what we're doing?" And usually, my first place is to say, "What are all the things you can subtract to actually make room for what matters most?" Because the reality is, you have 5 full work weeks for the remainder of the year, right? So don't get caught up in this myth that you've got 8 full work weeks because you don't, right? And you know where you're sitting right now. You already know of the projects that are going to either flatten, like start to falter, or that could that could get punted into quarter 1 or quarter 2 of next year.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so first thing that I would say is like have the conversation with yourself and your team about preemptively moving those as opposed to carrying them in your head, like and not actually getting forward to them. Second thing that I would say on this one is um this is going to sound obvious, but a lot of what I say is the obvious stuff. Go back to whatever quarterly or strategic plan that you have. And one, see how real that damn thing is right now, because it might have
Hmm.
drifted so far away that it's no longer real. And that's fine, but it's how you have the conversation about that that's important. And if it is still real, think about the 1, 2, or 3 things from that plan or from those intentions that truly matter that you can push forward and that would make a difference if you did so. Sometimes there's one thing you got to push forward. Sometimes you can get 3 in there because again, you've got 5 weeks remaining. And the point there is just to instead of deciding sort of intuitively or based on memory, go back to previous commitments, which is what a strategic plan actually is when you think about it, right? It's a commitment that a team made with each other to get something done. Go back to that and decide what to do from there. And then I think the third thing from here is to um, address the emergent, meaning usually this time of the year, um, there's just emergent stuff that is popped up. And I don't mean emergency, I just mean stuff that has come up because of the activity that you've done. And if we're doing our best work as a team, the oddness or the oddity here is that there's more emergent good stuff that comes up that we often don't attend to because we're too stuck to the strategic plan or the previous commitments. So there is something that has been emergent and important. Again, have that conversation with your team. If you're the leader, or if you're not the leader, have that conversation with your leader so that you can actually center on this and have the conscious and shared commitment to drive these projects forward. Um, I think we may or may not go too far with this, but one of the fundamental skills, the judgment skills, right? I was thinking about this earlier, Lisa, like what type of things would we talk about, right? I think a lot of times when we're thinking about learning and development, we think of technical skills to improve, right? For whatever the industry we are. But there are two other categories of skill that actually tend to make a bigger difference and are really great for mentoring. So one is just the people skills. How do you get along with people? How do you organize people? How do you, work with people well? And I think the second are the judgment skills. How do you prioritize? How do you evaluate? How do you plan? How do you sort of, get those things done? Um, it's a really good time of the year to to remember that people skills and judgment skills develop over quarters and half years and require continual investments, right? Whereas a technical skill, you can learn technical skills in a week, depending upon the trainer and things like that. So, as it relates to mentoring, it's actually a really good time to pause and say, hey, for myself, what are the people skills and what are the judgment skills that I want to improve? And then for my colleagues or mentors or mentees, what are their people skills? What are their judgment skills that we might want to invest in this last period of time so that it doesn't fall to the urgent of, using their technical skills to get things done?
Thank you for not calling any of those soft skills.
I hate soft skills. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they were so soft, right? We would all have them in spades.
Yep.
Um, yeah, super, super helpful. From a planning perspective, right? So I think it's easy to do one of two things. One is not to plan, which is probably everybody else's default. Or if you're like me, to overplan and spend all your time planning and less than. So what's the balance? Is there kind of a process? And as you're answering, Charlie, if you could help us think through how we could use our mentoring relationships to help us do some of that planning, that'd be helpful too.
Yeah. So I'm going to start by thinking about or by expressing the 5 projects rule. No more than 5 active projects per time horizon.
Mm,
The per time horizon does a lot of work, right? It does a whole lot of work because if you're thinking at the quarterly level, you want to be thinking in terms of quarter size projects that obviously contain month size projects, contain week size projects, so on and so forth. And that does a lot of work to help you not get into over planning because, like, we can say quarter 4 next year, we're doing project X and not have to get down into the scheduling and prioritizing and sort of chunking down of what project X is until like quarter 2 of next year because it's not, we don't need to do that. We just needed to reserve that spot in quarter 4 of next year for that quarter size project. Does that make sense?
yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so that last piece does a lot of work because if you're really thinking about the core skill of planning, which typically is selecting projects, chunking those projects down, and sequencing them and getting them on your calendar. Those are actually the core planning skills. You have the other things of visioning, brainstorming, researching that goes before, and then you have the communication of the plan that goes after. And I know I'm getting very specific here
I think that's
because
helpful.
this middle section of selecting a project, right, which is prioritizing, chunking that project down into doable parts, sequencing it and getting it on the calendar does not take as long as most people think. Right. It's actually the brainstorming, researching, and strategizing on the former side that takes a lot of time. If you use time horizons to your advantage, like you can sit down, a week rolls over, you can think, okay, what are my no more than 5 active projects for this week? Week size projects, right?
Mhm.
You can sort of select them, you kind of know what that's going to do, and then you can use your days to be like, okay, I wake up this morning. I've said, here are the projects that I'm doing this week. with the time and resources that I have available, how am I going to push those projects forward today? And you can be really dynamic with it. And you can do that usually once people get into a practice of 10 to 20 minutes a day, you can just keep it rolling. It's when you fall out of that practice or when you try to like put research and brainstorming and like enrolling and all those different types of things into the planning process that it extends into a large amount of time. So the other thing that the 5 projects rule helps with is the scope of things that you're thinking about and trying to plan is small enough that it doesn't take forever. Right. So I'm hoping everyone listening now can think, okay, if I constrain that to, let's call it 3 work projects and 2 personal projects, because by the way, personal projects are projects. Like if you got a kid going to school and you need to get them there, that's a project. If you've got Thanksgiving and the family are coming in town, that's a project, right? People think about those projects and think they're free, but they are not, right?
Mhm.
So if you think about your 3, let's pretend, major work projects this week, and what it would take to get momentum on it and to chunk it down, it doesn't take that long. It's when you try to do that across 17 that you end up clicking through Asana and then rage quitting after 50 minutes because you haven't gotten anything done, right? And you
Yeah.
might as well go look at Instagram because there are cat videos there, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Never underestimate the dopamine effect of good cat video. I know that the your Start Finishing book has a really good workbook that can be really helpful for this, and also that your company Productive Flourishing has some really good tools for folks to check out as well, and they can see that on your website. So,
Absolutely. If you go to
um,
free planners and worksheets, there's all sorts of stuff related to this. But the core concept that I would say is actually 5 projects rule. If you could really get your arms wrapped around that and understanding, like, one, humans were terrible at understanding how long things will take to get done.
yeah,
We just are. And yet I think most of us intuitively know what a week size project feels like, right? So let's use our spatial reasoning more so than our temporal reasoning because our spatial reasoning is actually so much better.
yeah. AI. How we had a whole session on AI recently at the International Mentoring Association, and a lot of people are just talking about it in so many different contexts. But I'm curious how you see technology and AI intersecting with mentoring and with team habits, and what should we be intentional about preserving in the human context, and what should we outsource, if you will, to AI?
Yeah, that's a broad question. Let's see. How do I do this in 2 minutes? Here's the general principle here is I like to think in terms of artificial intelligence, not as artificial, but assistive intelligence. So what
Mm,
can it assist you in doing and thinking like you're hiring an assistant to do certain things? Because when you program AI to be in a specific role, it actually can be very useful.
mhm,
Now, I think as far as mentoring and people skills go, I think the biggest gift of AI is it creates a moment to where we're not so reactive with our teammates and colleagues and leaders that we can actually use the tool to take a beat, figure out what we want to say, figure out what our options are, and say that as opposed to what we might naturally say when we're in a crunch or when we're not being our best or when we had a bad burrito, right? So I think that's where I would want people in the context of this relationship focused on is like, how can it help you be a better communicator and help you figure out what you're thinking and what you're wanting to get out of any exchange more so than it doing a generative technical skill because it's actually not great at that. Like if you pay attention, AI has its own language that if you read enough of it, you can tell it's written by AI.
mm,
Right.
yeah.
And so when it comes to the promises of AI doing generative technical skills, it's actually falling really short on that currently, but it's doing a great job with helping people be better communicators with themselves, figure out what they actually want to take a beat so that they're not so passive aggressive. I think it can be helpful to have you articulate, say, your career goals or your professional goals to yourself, if nothing else. And then you can take that product that you've worked with it and then take that and talk to the real humans who can help you do that better and provide counter things or counterpoints. Because the thing that we're going to have to get used to in the world of AI
Mm,
is we actually do need more humans that can point out blind spots and flaws in our reasoning and thinking because AI is not programmed to do that. AI is programmed to agree with you and make you think you're smarter than you are, right? And so in this period, AI, like we can take all that stuff that I just talked about, but then take it to real humans who know the real world and have our best interest in play that can say, you know what, that sounds great. And here's some suggestions that I might have for how you think about that. Or hey, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Because again, AI is not really great at that. So that's where I would say for now. I think the other thing is that it can be good at helping you consider specific skills that you might want to learn in your profession, even if it doesn't teach you those skills. Right. And so it's
Yeah.
really helpful for spotting blind spots in that way. But again, take the output from AI if it matters and talk to real humans, and who can help you correct for what AI is not going to provide for you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Charlie, before we let you go, a lightning round. Are you
Okay.
ready? Are you buckled in? Buckle up.
Hold on. I got to switch brains
Switch your brains.
into quick answers. Okay. Here we go.
Okay, here we go. Um, a book besides your own that shaped how you think about teams or mentoring.
Touch Points by, um, Douglas Conant and Met Norgard.
Okay,
Why I like it is because it reminds us that in small moments we can make a big difference for people.
awesome. A personal habit that's changed how you mentor others.
Intentionally allowing 2 or 3 seconds between when someone finishes saying something before I say something, creating silence.
Okay. One thing people can do between now and the end of the year to make their mentoring practice more future forward.
Touching with people about what their professional goals are and have that be more driven, have that drive the conversation more so than what's just bubbling up today.
Hmm. Okay, as somebody who is prolific in creating things, what's a ritual or habit that keeps you both grounded and creative?
Writing every day.
Hmm. Okay, complete the sentence. A future forward mentoring practice is one that.
Embraces the unknown of the future as a good thing.
Hmm. I love it. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Charlie, for joining us. It's fun to work with you in a different capacity for a change. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And we will see you again in the new year for a whole new series of thought leader conversations. Go forth and mentor on.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks for having me.